She thought he was nothing but a senile old fool, easy to rob and easier to forget. But when the son's wife crept into Robert's room at midnight and reached for the hidden safe key, what she uncovered left her frozen in terror while he watched from the shadows with a knowing smile. It wasn't weakness she found in that drawer. It was a trap laid with precision, proof that the man she underestimated had been 2 steps ahead all along. What came next would shatter her lies, expose her greed, and turn her glittering arrogance into ruin. Don't look away. Subscribe now and see what happened when the lights came on. Clara's fork clinked against her plate as her eyes lingered on Robert longer than comfort allowed. Her voice dressed in casual curiosity, but sharpened like a blade beneath the surface. She leaned forward, her smile thin and rehearsed, and asked again about the safe upstairs, about what kind of lock it had, about whether anyone else knew how to open it. Robert felt the air in the dining room tighten, as though invisible hands were squeezing the life from the conversation. His son Daniel chuckled absently, too focused on his meal to catch the undertone, but Robert heard it clearly. Every syllable Clara spoke carried a predator's rhythm. He set down his fork slowly, buying time, letting silence stretch until the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen became the loudest sound in the room. Clara's gaze didn't waver, pupils dark and unblinking, waiting for him to slip, to reveal something he wasn't supposed to. He answered in clipped phrases, saying he was organized, that Daniel knew what mattered, that everything was secure. But Clara's lips curled, just slightly, as though she was savoring his caution. Lauren, their young waitress at the small family-owned restaurant, drifted past with a tray, the smell of garlic bread trailing behind her, but Robert barely noticed. His heart thudded, not from age, but from recognition. He had seen that look before, years ago in the faces of men who smiled while scheming, who reached with hands already planning to take what wasn't theirs. Clara's questions kept circling like a vulture riding warm currents of air, dipping closer with each turn. She asked about his insurance, about what would happen if something ever happened to him, about whether Daniel would know where to find important documents. Robert felt a cold shiver creep across his spine, though he kept his expression neutral, his voice calm. He had lived 66 years, and in those years he had learned that silence could be a fortress, that patience could be sharper than any knife. Daniel laughed, embarrassed, trying to wave away her persistence, but Clara's tone didn't shift. She pushed harder, pressing like someone testing the weak spot in a wall. Robert noticed her hands drumming lightly on the table, her nails tapping out a rhythm too steady to be nerves. It was calculation, pure and simple, a sign that she wasn't improvising but rehearsing, pushing in exactly the way she had planned. He glanced at Daniel, who reached for his glass of water without noticing a thing, still blind to the storm brewing right next to him. For Robert, though, the room had changed. The warmth of dinner, the scent of roasted chicken and herbs, all of it had faded into the background, replaced by the sharp hum of danger. He studied Clara in that moment, really studied her. The curve of her smile was too perfect, her concern too precise. She wasn't asking as a curious daughter-in-law worried about an aging man's affairs. She was probing, building a map of where his vulnerabilities lay, and she wanted him to hand her the keys. She even dared to bring up the notion of accidents, her words soaked in false sympathy. Her voice dipped just enough to mimic sincerity. What if, heaven forbid, something happened to you, Robert? Would Daniel know where to find everything? The way she said it made Robert's chest tighten, not from fear, but from fury barely contained. He answered her with quiet finality, saying Daniel knew what he needed to know, nothing more. Clara's eyes flickered then, for just an instant, betraying her frustration at the closed door she had tried to pry open. The meal limped forward after that, Daniel making small talk about work, Clara laughing at the right moments. but the veneer had cracked. Robert saw it. He saw the way her gaze drifted back toward him every few minutes, still calculating, still measuring. When dinner ended, Daniel excused himself to take a call, leaving Clara to gather plates. She carried them to the kitchen, but not before brushing a hand along Robert's shoulder with a softness that tried to mask the steel in her eyes. He didn't flinch, but inside his resolve hardened. He recognized the game she was playing, and he would not be the old fool she imagined. Later that night, as he stood at the sink rinsing dishes, Robert replayed every word she had spoken, every flicker of her expression. The quiet rhythm of washing plates grounded him, the water warm against his hands. But his mind was anything but calm. He saw her in fragments, the tilt of her head when she asked about the safe, the slight dilation of her pupils when he hesitated, the almost imperceptible curl of her lip when she thought she had cornered him. It was all there, like evidence cataloged in a case file, and Robert knew what it meant. Clara wasn't merely curious. She was dangerous. He dried the last plate and set it in the cupboard, the kitchen falling silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. The house felt different now, stripped of its comfort, as though every corner had been turned into a stage where hidden threats could emerge at any moment. Robert stood in the quiet and realized he was no longer dining with family. He was living alongside an intruder who wore a smile as disguise. The thought struck him like a hammer, reverberating through his chest, leaving him wide awake with a sharpness he hadn't felt in years. When he walked past the hallway mirror, his reflection looked back at him, not frail, not helpless, but steady. His eyes, framed by lines carved from decades of experience, burned with clarity. Clara thought she had found a victim. What she didn't know was that Robert had spent 30 years working as an investigator, sifting through lies, exposing fraud, and catching people who thought they were cleverer than everyone else. He knew her type, and he knew exactly how to wait, how to watch, how to let a predator believe the hunt was going her way until the trap closed. Upstairs, muffled voices echoed through the walls. Daniel spoke softly, Clara's laugh cutting through like a knife. Robert listened for a moment, then turned away, his footsteps slow but deliberate. The evening had changed everything. He was no longer merely a host or a father trying to offer shelter. He was a man staring down betrayal under his own roof. The fork that had clinked against Clara's plate just hours earlier now felt like the tolling of a bell, a warning of the storm to come. Robert lay in bed later, the ceiling above him glowing faintly in the streetlight that filtered through the curtains. Sleep didn't come. His mind replayed Clara's voice again and again, each question a needle pricking deeper. He felt his anger simmer beneath his calm exterior, a steady burn that kept him awake as the night dragged on. He knew this was only the beginning. Her words at dinner weren't idle, and her curiosity wasn't casual. Something was coming. He didn't know when or how, but he knew Clara's intentions were not innocent, and that knowledge, sharp and undeniable, kept his eyes wide open in the dark, waiting for the next move. What Robert didn't know yet was that her move would come sooner than he expected, and when it did, the lines between family and enemy would shatter in a way that would leave glitter, lies, and betrayal exposed in the harshest possible light. Robert climbed the stairs with the quiet weight of routine, the kind of steps a man had taken for decades without thinking. But tonight something felt off, like the air itself carried a warning. The hallway light flickered faintly, throwing long shadows across the floorboards, and when he reached his bedroom, the unease that had been gnawing at him since dinner turned into certainty. The door stood ajar, just enough for a sliver of darkness to cut through the gap. A detail small enough most would miss, but not him. Robert always closed his bedroom door. Always. His hand tightened on the banister as he studied that opening, the silence of the house pressing in, his heart beat steady but heavy in his ears. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, every instinct sharpened. At first glance, the room seemed untouched, neat as ever. The bed was still made, corners tucked in crisp and tight. His reading glasses sat exactly where he had left them on the nightstand. But his eyes, trained from years of disciplined living, caught the fractures instantly. The closet door hung open by 4 inches when it should have been flush. The second drawer of his dresser didn't close properly, sticking out a fraction of an inch, and a corner of a yellowed folder peeked out like a tongue betraying a secret. He crossed the room in 3 steady strides and pulled the drawer fully open. Inside, the careful order he had maintained was broken. Papers had been shuffled, insurance documents mixed with bank statements. His will no longer buried at the back, but pushed toward the front. Whoever had done this hadn't been clumsy. They had been thorough, deliberate, hunting for something specific. Robert's stomach clenched as his hand slid along the underside of the drawer, where he had taped the small brass key years ago. A secret only he knew. The wood was bare, the tape ripped away. The key was gone. For a moment, the room spun in quiet disbelief. Then the realization struck with icy clarity. Someone had been inside his sanctuary. Someone who knew exactly what to look for. And they had stolen the one object that unlocked the heart of his security. He closed his eyes, feeling his breath tighten in his chest. Shock gave way to something sharper, a rage cold and clean, the kind that didn't boil over but carved itself into resolve. He turned to the safe in his walk-in closet, the sturdy steel box bolted into the floor, its digital lock blinking softly in the dark. He tested the keypad, listening to the reassuring beep. But it didn't matter. The missing key wasn't for daily use. It was the manual override, the backdoor entry that now rested in the wrong hands. Robert stood over it for a long moment, feeling the violation like fingerprints pressed against his skin. This wasn't an accident, not a curious hand fumbling in the wrong drawer. It was premeditated, calculated. Clara's questions at dinner had been the opening act. This intrusion was the main performance. He moved through the room with deliberate calm, restoring each drawer, straightening every detail. If Clara thought her trespass had gone unnoticed, he intended to let her believe it. Better to let her feel safe in her deception. Better to let her dig deeper into her own trap. But inside, Robert was no longer the quiet host. He was a man counting down to the moment of reckoning. As he sat on the edge of the bed, the lamplight catching the hard lines of his face, he thought of Daniel sleeping down the hall, oblivious. His son still believed in the woman he had married, trusted her with the blind loyalty of love. But Robert had seen through the mask. Clara wasn't building a life with Daniel. She was laying the groundwork for theft, and she had chosen Robert as her target. His chest ached not just with anger, but with sorrow for his son, who had no idea that the woman he called wife was already betraying the family he thought they were building. The house groaned faintly, settling as it always did at night. But every sound now felt like an echo of intrusion. Robert lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of that empty strip of tape under the drawer burned into his mind. His safe, his private papers, the legacy he had carefully guarded. It was all at risk. He replayed Clara's voice at dinner, her pointed questions about his security, her false concern about what might happen if he were gone. He thought of her pupils dilating, her fingers drumming against the table. And now he saw it clearly. She hadn't been imagining a future with his son. She had been imagining a future built on what she could steal. Sleep was impossible. Robert rose again, moving silently through the darkened room, checking the lock on the window, the hinges on the closet door, the latch on the safe. Everything was intact except for the absence of that one key, a void that carried the weight of betrayal. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly, staring out at the quiet suburban street bathed in pale moonlight. The world outside looked peaceful, ordinary, but within his walls something had shifted irreversibly. Clara thought she was clever, thought she had played him for a fool. What she didn't realize was that Robert had spent 3 decades as an investigator, watching men and women just like her trip over their own greed. He turned back to the room, his jaw set. The invasion of his privacy wasn't just a theft, it was a declaration. Clara had crossed a line, and once crossed, it could never be undone. Robert wasn't afraid. He was calculating, just as she had been, but with the patience of a man who understood that the longer you let someone believe they were in control, the harder they fell when the truth was revealed. He sat back down on the bed, the silence pressing in, his mind already sketching out the beginning of a plan. The game had started, and Clara believed she had the upper hand. But Robert knew better. He would let her think she was winning. He would let her feel safe. And when the moment came, when she reached too far with hands already stained by greed, she would learn what it meant to underestimate a man who had already lived through betrayal, who had seen lies from every angle, and who now had nothing left to lose but everything to protect. The drawer closed with a soft click as he finished restoring the room to its deceptive calm. To anyone else, it looked as though nothing had changed. But Robert knew, and the house itself seemed to know, that a storm was gathering inside its walls. Clara had taken the key, but she had also given him something more valuable. She had revealed herself. And Robert, lying back in the dim light, eyes open to the dark, understood one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning, and what came next would tear away every mask until the truth stood naked in the light, glittering and merciless. The house had long since fallen into its nightly rhythm, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional groan of wooden beams settling, the distant ticking of the hallway clock. Robert lay still in his bed, eyes wide open, his body unmoving, though his mind refused him sleep. He had spent hours replaying the scene in his bedroom, the drawers left open, the key missing, the undeniable proof that Clara had crossed a line. Yet as heavy as the knowledge sat in his chest, he hadn't expected what came next. It began with the sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, crossing the living room floor below. His heart slowed, not quickened, as instinct took hold. He moved no more than the rise and fall of his chest, listening, every sense sharpened. Then he heard her voice, hushed but clear in the stillness, drifting upward through the old ductwork of the house. Clara. Her words slithered through the vent above his bed, meant for secrecy, but delivered into his waiting ears like a confession. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep." The whisper carried smugness, confidence. Robert shifted just enough to slip his phone from the nightstand, thumb sliding over the screen, opening the recording app with the practiced calm of a man who knew patience was his greatest weapon. He set the phone under his pillow, microphone open, capturing every word that spilled from her mouth. "The old man's definitely loaded," Clara said, her tone stripped of all the sweetness she'd worn at dinner. "I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the whole thing. We're talking serious money here." Robert's jaw tightened, his breath shallow but steady. She had gone through his private papers, memorized his life in numbers, reduced him to assets in a ledger. He stared at the ceiling, his anger burning not in flames but in cold steel. Then the words came that cut deeper than theft. "Tomorrow night's perfect. Daniel's out at his work event. Gives us 2 hours at least." Her voice lowered, urgent now. "I already have the safe key. Grabbed it during dinner. He keeps everything in there. Cash, jewelry, bank information. Once it's done, we're out. No second chances. You know what's at stake." There was a pause, and Robert heard the faint rustle of her pacing. Then her confession spilled out like poison. "I can't hold off the collectors any longer. 47,000 in gambling debt, and they're done waiting. This has to happen now." The words hit Robert like the crack of a gavel. Gambling debt. It all fit. The questions, the desperation, the way her smile never reached her eyes. She wasn't just opportunistic. She was cornered, desperate, dangerous. His hand slid across the sheets, feeling the phone vibrating faintly with the sound it captured. Evidence etched into memory with every syllable. "I told him I was worried about his health," Clara continued, her laugh sharp and cruel. "Old fool believes I actually care. Daniel's too blind to see it, but by Thursday we'll be clear. I'll tell him we've got a job offer in another state. We'll disappear before his father knows what hit him." Robert's breath stilled, his pulse steady as stone. She had not only planned to rob him, but to tear his son away in the process, dragging Daniel into her mess, making him collateral in a life built on lies. He lay there in silence, listening as she confirmed every suspicion, every instinct he'd sharpened over years of reading deceit. "He'll never suspect family," Clara whispered with venom. "Even if he notices something's gone, Daniel will convince him he just misplaced it. You know how old people get about their memory." The insult landed like a slap, but Robert didn't flinch. 66 wasn't ancient, and his memory was sharper than she would ever guess. Every word, every pause, every cruel note of her voice etched itself into his mind as clearly as the recording captured it. He could see her in his imagination, pacing the living room in the glow of her phone screen, whispering into the darkness with the arrogance of someone who believed she was untouchable. When she laughed, it was low and ugly, a sound that scraped across the silence of the night. Yeah, well, maybe he should have been more careful who he let into his house. Life lesson, right? Robert's hand clenched around the edge of his pillow, the cold fire in his chest steadying into resolve. She thought she was clever, thought she had him mapped out like a mark on a board. But she had made the mistake of speaking her treachery into the air of his home. And now he had it all. Proof, motive, plan, and the arrogance that would be her undoing. He heard her end the call, the shuffle of her steps moving back toward the stairs. He quickly stopped the recording, locking the phone and sliding it back into place. Through the narrow crack of his slightly open door, he saw the shadow move across the hallway as she returned to the guest room. The door clicked shut and silence reclaimed the house. Robert lay back, eyes open to the dark, the weight of the truth pressing against his chest, but no longer crushing. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't confused. He had everything he needed, the evidence of betrayal clear and undeniable. The woman who thought she could strip him of dignity, rob him blind, and vanish into the night had just handed him the weapon he needed to end her. The old house creaked again, harmless this time, but Robert felt its pulse in rhythm with his own. The night was his ally, and patience was his sharpened blade. Tomorrow night, Clara believed she would hold the power, her hands on his safe, her pockets filling with the life he had built. What she didn't know was that he would be waiting, armed not with anger, but with proof, with foresight, with the kind of quiet strength born of years surviving lies and watching predators fall by their own schemes. He closed his eyes briefly, but it wasn't sleep that came. It was planning. Every detail, every step, each move laid out in his mind like a chess game already won. Clara thought she had the key to his safe. What she didn't realize was that Robert now held the key to her downfall. And when the trap closed, it wouldn't just be the glitter on her skin that marked her guilt. It would be the truth she had spoken in whispers, now echoing louder than any lie could ever cover. And as the clock ticked past midnight, Robert lay still in the silence, knowing with absolute clarity that the real reckoning was only hours away. Robert lay in the dark, the glow of the clock casting red digits across his ceiling, each number burning into him like a slow brand. He had spent the better part of the night listening to Clara's whispered betrayal, every word etched into the recording on his phone, every insult echoing through his mind. She had called him a fool, dismissed him as a relic, a stepping stone to quick cash. Yet what burned deeper than the insult was the realization that she had wrapped his son into her scheme, using Daniel as camouflage, hiding her crimes behind his loyalty. That thought twisted inside Robert, heavier than any threat to his money or possessions. Daniel loved her. He believed in her. And while he slept down the hall, she was already calculating how to strip his father bare and vanish into the night. The fury in Robert's chest wanted release, wanted to explode in the silence of the house. But he had learned long ago that rage was a fire better used to forge steel. He breathed through it, steady, his hand resting lightly on the phone beneath his pillow, the evidence safe, the truth undeniable. He could have sunk into despair, could have let the betrayal crush him under its weight, but despair was useless. Clara wanted him weak, blind, stumbling toward the grave she had already dug in her mind. Instead, Robert felt something else rise within him, something sharper and more dangerous. Determination. He thought back to his years as an investigator, the faces of men and women who thought they could trick their way into fortune, who underestimated the quiet patience of someone who saw through masks. Clara was no different, just more personal, and that made the resolve cut deeper. She had invaded his home, rifled through his drawers, stolen his key, and yet believed he would never notice. She thought she had already won, and that arrogance would be her undoing. Robert rolled onto his side, staring at the faint outline of the curtains swaying in the night air. His chest ached with a mix of heartbreak and fury. The heartbreak came from Daniel, from knowing that his son's faith in his wife was being twisted into a shield for her betrayal. The fury came from Clara, from her smug laugh as she plotted to destroy them both. He pictured her face at dinner, the calculated gleam in her eyes when she spoke of his safe, the mask of concern that cracked when she mentioned accidents, inheritances, insurance. He had seen enough liars to recognize the performance. Now he would make her drop the act for good. The plan began forming in his mind, sharp and precise. He would not confront her outright, not yet. She thrived on manipulation, on spinning stories, on using Daniel's love to deflect suspicion. No, confrontation would give her room to twist the truth. Instead, Robert would let her walk willingly into her own trap. She had already set a date, already revealed her plan. Tomorrow night, while Daniel was gone, she would make her move. And tomorrow night, Robert would be ready. He lay there in the dark, rehearsing the steps. The real key already hidden, the safe still locked, the decoy waiting where her greedy hands would reach. But that wasn't enough. He wanted proof, undeniable, something Daniel could see with his own eyes, something no lie could cover. His mind flicked through possibilities with the speed of instinct. Surveillance, audio, physical evidence. He had the recording of her call, but he wanted more. He wanted her caught in the act, her greed exploding in her face. Robert sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The house was silent, the air cold against his skin, but his pulse was steady. This wasn't fear, it was preparation. He rose and crossed to the dresser, sliding the drawer open, running his hand along the space where the key had once been. His fingers traced the empty spot like a scar. He could almost see Clara here, rummaging through his life with hands that didn't belong. The violation reignited his fury, but beneath it was clarity. She believed he was too old, too tired, too blind to notice. That was her mistake. He noticed everything. He closed the drawer gently, leaving it as he had found it, a stage waiting for its performance. He moved through the house quietly, his steps practiced, his mind cataloging every detail. The creak of the stair, the hum of the refrigerator, the shadows cast by the streetlight outside. These were not weaknesses. They were tools. Every sound and silence in this house belonged to him, and Clara was an intruder who thought she had mastered the terrain. She hadn't. Back in his room, Robert picked up his phone and played back a snippet of the recording, Clara's voice spilling out like venom. The old man's definitely loaded. He'll never suspect family. Her arrogance filled the space, but instead of pain, Robert felt grim satisfaction. He had her. Every word she had said was another nail in the coffin of her lies. Daniel might resist at first, blinded by love, but even he could not ignore a recording of his wife plotting theft and mocking his father. Still, Robert wanted the moment to be undeniable, to burn itself into Daniel's memory so the truth could never be softened. He lay back down, pulling the blanket over him, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The ache in his chest was still there, but it had transformed. Where despair had threatened to take root, now only resolve remained. He thought of Daniel as a boy, running across the yard with scraped knees and bright eyes, trusting his father to always be there. That boy deserved more than to be shackled to a woman who saw life as a game of theft and deception. Robert would not let Clara drag him down. He would protect his son, even if it meant breaking his heart in the process. The night wore on, the minutes ticking by. But Robert's eyes stayed open, his mind alive with the cold fire of determination. Tomorrow night would not be a robbery. It would be a reckoning. Clara believed she was clever, believed she had orchestrated the perfect crime. But Robert had lived long enough to know that perfect crimes don't exist. They always unravel, always leave a thread loose for someone patient enough to pull. And Robert was patient. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, Robert finally exhaled a long breath, the kind that carried both pain and promise. The betrayal cut deep, but the wound only hardened him. Clara had mistaken kindness for weakness, age for fragility, love for blindness. Now she would see what those mistakes cost. Robert rose from the bed as the house stirred with the faint light of morning, his movements deliberate, his mind unshakable. The day ahead would look ordinary to Clara, another step toward her scheme. But for Robert, every hour was a countdown, every moment a piece of the trap falling into place. He poured his coffee, the bitter warmth grounding him, and stared out at the quiet street beyond his window. The world looked peaceful, but inside his house, a war was already being fought in silence, and as Robert sipped, his gaze sharp and unyielding, he knew the end was coming. Not for him, not for his son, but for Clara. Tomorrow night, when she reached for the life she thought she could steal, she would discover the truth. He wasn't her victim. He was her judge, and the sentence was waiting. Morning light crept through the blinds, thin lines cutting across Robert's bedroom, illuminating the space where betrayal had taken root. He rose with purpose, his body still stiff from a sleepless night, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. The memory of Clara's voice on that secret recording still rang in his ears, smug and venomous, every word a confession. He had listened long enough. Now it was time to act. The house was silent, Daniel still asleep down the hall. Clara tucked into the role she played so well, the dutiful wife, the concerned daughter-in-law. But Robert knew better. Behind her smile was hunger, and hunger made people reckless. He moved first to the dresser, the very place she had already defiled. The drawer slid open with a quiet whisper, the neat stacks of documents and photographs waiting like loyal soldiers. Robert's hand moved with deliberate care, reaching for the spot beneath the drawer where the real brass key had once been hidden. It was gone now, stolen by Clara, but he had already thought of that. At dawn, before the house stirred, he had retrieved the duplicate he kept locked away in another hiding place, one she would never discover. This key would never leave his possession again. He slipped it into a small pouch and tucked it deep into the kitchen's junk drawer beneath rubber bands and bottle caps, a spot so mundane even the boldest thief would overlook it. The decoy came next, an old luggage key, tarnished and similar enough to fool someone eager and desperate. He set it gently in the back corner of the drawer, placing it with the precision of a stage director preparing for the final act. He leaned back and studied the scene. To Clara's greedy eyes, it would look like victory. To him, it was the bait that would expose her for what she was. But Robert wasn't finished. He wanted more than discovery. He wanted evidence, humiliation, something undeniable. That was when the idea struck, and a grim smile curved across his lips. He had once investigated insurance fraud where a thief had been caught red-handed by a dye pack exploding in his briefcase. The lesson had stayed with him. People rarely expect traps until it is too late. In his basement, among tools and forgotten projects, Robert found what he needed, a cheap party confetti cannon left over from a neighborhood gathering. He dismantled it carefully, studying the spring-loaded mechanism, his hands steady as though years hadn't passed since he last worked with devices and traps. Into the chamber he poured glitter, silver, and gold, the kind that clung to skin and clothes for days, impossible to shake off, impossible to deny. He tested it with a wooden spoon, the explosion filling the air with shimmering dust that settled across the basement floor like a mocking snowfall. Perfect. Carrying the device upstairs, Robert installed it inside the dresser drawer, angled precisely so that anyone reaching for the decoy key would set it off. He tested the sensitivity, making sure casual movement wouldn't trigger it, but a determined hand would. 3 times he repeated the process, each test a success, each glitter cloud confirming the trap's perfection. When he was done, he reset it, arranging the contents so it looked untouched, innocent. The drawer was no longer just a drawer. It was a stage, and Clara would be the actor who revealed herself before the curtain fell. But he wanted more. He wanted eyes on the performance, proof that could not be denied, not even by Daniel's loyalty. At the electronics store, he purchased a small security camera, the kind meant for discreet home surveillance, wireless with night vision. He paid cash, his words clipped but calm, and left without explanation. Back at the house, he mounted it carefully between books on his nightstand, angled toward the dresser, hidden in plain sight. Through the app on his phone, he watched the live feed, crystal clear, every detail of the room captured. The camera saw everything, and when the time came, it would bear witness to Clara's crime. By afternoon, the trap was complete. Robert stood in the center of his room, studying his work. The drawer armed with glitter, the decoy key waiting like a lure, the camera poised to capture every second. Nothing appeared unusual, nothing out of place. To Clara, the room would look unchanged, his routine unbroken, his defenses absent. But underneath that calm veneer lay the truth. Her arrogance had already written her downfall, and Robert had simply given it shape. When he returned downstairs, Clara was in the kitchen, her voice bright as she greeted him, her smile warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. Daniel sat at the table, reading the paper, oblivious. Robert answered with his usual quiet tone, masking the knowledge that burned beneath his calm. Every word Clara spoke, every glance she cast at him, only confirmed what he already knew. She believed she was winning. She believed he was blind, and that belief would destroy her. As the evening crept closer, Robert rehearsed the performance he would give. He would act tired, complain of needing rest, perhaps even mention his sleeping pills. He would let Clara think he was weak, unconscious, a man too far gone to hear her footsteps in the night. He would let her come to him, let her open his drawer, let her reach for the key she thought would unlock her escape. And then, as glitter exploded across her skin and the camera recorded her shame, the truth would burn brighter than any lie she could tell. Night fell, and the house settled again into silence. Robert sat in his chair, sipping tea, watching Clara from the corner of his eye. She laughed at something Daniel said, her hand resting on his arm with perfect affection, her eyes shining with the act she had perfected. But Robert saw beyond it. He saw the calculation, the hunger, the quiet glance toward the stairs when she thought no one was looking. He smiled to himself, not with joy, but with certainty. The trap was set, the stage prepared, the audience waiting. Tomorrow night, when Daniel left for his event, Clara would make her move. She would creep into his room, her heart racing with greed, her fingers reaching for what wasn't hers. And tomorrow night she would find not wealth, but her own ruin, painted in silver and gold, caught forever in the unblinking eye of the camera she never noticed. Robert leaned back in his chair, his tea cooling in his hands, his expression calm, but his thoughts sharp. Clara believed she had mapped every inch of his house, every detail of his life, but she hadn't mapped him. She hadn't accounted for the man who had lived long enough to know that trust, once betrayed, demanded a price. And as midnight drew closer, Robert knew with absolute certainty that the price would be paid, and Clara's downfall would be as bright and undeniable as the glitter that would mark her guilt for the world to see. The morning sun spilled across the kitchen table, catching in the steam that curled above the coffee mugs. Robert moved slowly, deliberately, as though age weighed down his every gesture. He placed Daniel's plate in front of him, set Clara's cup just within her reach, and finally lowered himself into his own chair with a faint groan that was half performance, half truth. The act began in the small things, the way he rubbed his eyes, the way his fork lingered above his eggs as though fatigue dulled his appetite, the weary sighs between sips of coffee. Daniel glanced at him with mild concern, but Clara's attention was sharper. She studied him from across the table with eyes that gleamed, her smile polite, her expression satisfied. She thought she was watching an old man fading into weakness, a man who no longer noticed the shifting ground beneath his own roof. She believed she was already in control, and Robert fed that belief with every carefully placed gesture. "You look tired, Dad," Daniel said softly, concern in his voice. Robert waved him off with a slow hand, forcing a faint smile. "Didn't sleep much. The evenings are getting harder. I think I'll start taking those pills the doctor gave me. Once they kick in, I don't hear a thing until morning." His voice carried the right mixture of resignation and reassurance, the kind of line a son would dismiss but a schemer would seize. Daniel nodded, distracted, but Robert caught the subtle shift in Clara's face. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk before she dropped her eyes to her toast. That smug little flicker told him everything. She had swallowed the bait whole. "Maybe it's for the best," Clara added, her tone laced with feigned sympathy. "You deserve rest. It must be hard keeping up this big house on your own." She buttered her bread with calm precision, but her eyes sparkled like a gambler holding a winning hand. Robert's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the steady burn of control. He knew her type, knew the hunger behind her words. Let her think he was fragile. Let her think the night would swallow him whole while she crept into his room. He wanted her confident. He wanted her careless. Daniel pushed his chair back, muttering about heading to work early, and Clara's gaze followed him as he left the room. The front door clicked shut, leaving the silence of the house broken only by the faint clink of Robert's spoon against his cup. Clara leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You should take it easy today," she said smoothly. "Maybe turn in early. You've been through so much." Robert forced a tired chuckle. "Early to bed sounds about right. Once those pills are in me, I'll be gone until sunrise. Dead to the world." He let the phrase hang between them, his tone light but loaded. Clara's eyes lingered on him a moment too long, her smile stretching thin with satisfaction. She excused herself not long after, disappearing upstairs, likely to whisper into her phone again, likely to confirm her plan with the same hushed venom he had recorded the night before. Robert remained at the table, sipping his coffee, his body still and his mind sharpened like glass. Every move she made confirmed his trap was working. She thought she had mapped his weaknesses, but she was walking blind toward a wall she would never see until she hit it. He rose slowly, clearing the plates, moving with the careful rhythm of a man who knew patience was power. The sound of water running in the sink masked the faint creak of the floor above him. Clara was pacing again. He pictured her smug expression, the way she believed she already had his life reduced to a drawer, a key, a safe waiting to be emptied. He let the image settle in his chest, not with despair, but with grim anticipation. The day unfolded with cruel normalcy. Clara hummed as she folded laundry, her voice floating down the hallway like a tune meant to soothe, but Robert knew it was the song of a predator circling her prey. Daniel returned in the afternoon, dropping casual kisses on her cheek, still blind to the trap she was setting. Robert spoke little, retreating often into silence, playing his role to perfection. At dinner, he yawned more than usual, let his fork linger in the air as though chewing was a chore. He rubbed his temples, muttered about being more tired lately, and Clara's nods of sympathy only confirmed the performance had landed exactly as he intended. When the evening settled into quiet, Robert leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw as though weariness consumed him. "I think I'll turn in early tonight," he said softly. "All this family activity wears me out more than I expected." Daniel offered to clean the dishes, grateful for his father's efforts, but Robert waved him off with another weary smile. "You two enjoy the evening. I'll be upstairs. Don't stay up too late." He stood slowly, gripping the railing as though age weighed on him, and glanced back at Clara. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed with anticipation, with the certainty that tonight she would claim her prize. Robert let the corner of his mouth twitch into the faintest smile as he climbed the stairs. She didn't notice. She was already celebrating a victory she hadn't won. In his room, he closed the door behind him, locking the expression on his face into something between exhaustion and fragility. The camera sat hidden in its place, the drawer armed with its glitter bomb, the decoy key waiting like bait in a trap. He changed into his night clothes with deliberate slowness, brushed his teeth, and finally slipped under the covers. Every movement an act in a performance only Clara believed. The house fell silent again, the hum of appliances below, the soft creak of wood shifting under the weight of its years. Robert lay still, his breathing deep and even, every sound calculated to mimic the sleep of a man drugged into oblivion. Yet behind closed eyes his mind raced with the precision of a hunter. He could feel the trap humming around him, waiting for the moment it would spring. Downstairs, Clara's laugh echoed faintly as she spoke to Daniel. She was buying time, waiting for the hours to stretch thin, waiting for the house to slip fully into night. Robert's fingers brushed the edge of his phone on the nightstand, the device already recording, its eye and ear ready to capture everything. He inhaled slowly, exhaled, his pulse steady. Clara thought she had beaten him. She thought tonight she would finally strip him bare. But Robert knew better. He had fed her arrogance, stoked her confidence, let her believe he was weak. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, his eyes stayed closed. His chest rose and fell with practiced rhythm. But his mind was sharp, waiting for the sound of her footsteps in the hall, waiting for the exact moment when the predator stepped willingly into her own snare. The house was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed against the walls and turned every sound into an intruder. Robert lay still in his bed, eyes closed, body slack, breathing steady, the perfect imitation of a man drugged into oblivion. The faint glow of the clock read 2:43 a.m. when the first groan of the stairs broke the stillness. He had been waiting for it, every nerve tuned to the moment Clara made her move. His phone beside him displayed the live feed from the hidden camera, its lens capturing the empty stretch of his bedroom in eerie green night vision. He didn't move, didn't twitch, but his pulse ticked like a metronome in his chest. The hallway whispered with the weight of her footsteps, deliberate and careful. She had studied the house long enough to know which boards to avoid, which sections groaned too loud, which doors needed a softer touch. She thought she was gliding like a shadow, but Robert heard every calculated pause, every careful breath. The door to his room eased open with excruciating slowness, the sliver of hallway light widening to reveal her silhouette. Clara stood frozen for 30 seconds, watching him, waiting for the twitch of an eyelid, the shift of a hand. She wanted to be certain he was lost to the pills she believed he had swallowed. Satisfied, she slipped inside, her figure black against the faint glow of the digital clock. She wore dark clothes, her hair tied back, moving with the cold confidence of a thief who had already rehearsed this scene in her mind 100 times. Robert remained motionless, his breaths deep, regular, convincing. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him as she crossed the carpet, her steps soundless, her intent sharp. She reached the dresser, the very drawer she had violated before, the one now armed and waiting. Her fingers brushed the handle, steady and sure, pulling it open with a practiced hand. Robert saw her on the camera feed, her face tight with anticipation, her eyes scanning the contents for the prize she believed was hers. Then her hand darted toward the back of the drawer, where the decoy key gleamed faintly in the darkness, waiting like bait. Her fingers closed around it with triumph. The explosion shattered the silence. A thunderclap of compressed air burst from the drawer, spraying a storm of silver and gold glitter into the room. It coated Clara in an instant, bursting over her face, her clothes, her hair, filling the air with a blinding shimmer. She staggered backward with a gasp, coughing, her hands clawing at the sparkling dust that clung to her skin like evidence forged from light. The room erupted in glitter, cascading down in waves, turning her into a grotesque spectacle, a walking disco ball in the middle of a crime scene. Robert snapped on his bedside lamp, his performance of confusion flawless. He sat up slowly, blinking against the brightness, his voice laced with feigned bewilderment. "What in God's name, Clara? What are you doing in my room?" She froze, glitter dripping from her lashes, her mouth open but no words forming. The decoy key trembled in her hand, its brass surface now glowing under the lamplight. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the jar, except her crime was written across her entire body, each fleck of gold and silver condemning her. I heard a noise," she stammered finally, her voice thin and desperate. "I thought someone was breaking in." Robert's eyes swept the room, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror, though inside his chest he felt a grim satisfaction. "Breaking in? Into my dresser drawer?" His words cut the air like glass. Clara's hands twitched, scattering glitter to the floor. From down the hall came the sound of feet hitting the floor. Daniel's voice, groggy and alarmed, carried through the darkness. "Dad, what's going on?" Clara's face drained of color beneath the shimmering mask of glitter. Panic flashed in her eyes. She turned toward the door, as if to compose herself before Daniel arrived. But Robert spoke again, sharp and accusing. "Why are you in my room at 3 a.m, Clara? Why are you holding that key?" Before she could form another excuse, Daniel appeared in the doorway. His hair disheveled, his robe clutched around him. His eyes widened at the sight of his wife, covered head to toe in sparkling confetti, standing beside his father's open drawer with a key in her trembling hands. "What the hell is this?" Daniel's voice cracked with disbelief. Clara sputtered, her words tangled. "It's not what it looks like. I thought I heard something. I was checking." "Checking," Robert echoed, his tone slicing her excuse apart. "By opening my drawer? By pulling out a key that doesn't belong to you?" Daniel's gaze darted between them, confusion warring with dawning realization. His wife, the woman he trusted, stood glowing like a thief under a spotlight, while his father sat in bed with the look of a man betrayed but not broken. Clara reached out toward him, her glitter-coated hand shaking. "Daniel, please, you have to believe me." But Daniel recoiled, the distance between them a silent verdict. The camera on the nightstand caught every second, the glitter floating in the air like golden dust, the key glinting in her hand, the desperation on her face. It was undeniable, and Clara knew it. Robert leaned back slightly, his eyes locked on hers, his voice low but edged with steel. "You thought I was asleep. You thought I wouldn't notice. But you're wrong, Clara. I see you." Her lips trembled, her mask shattered. The smug expression that had lingered over breakfast was gone, replaced by raw fear. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing as he stared at the woman he no longer recognized. Clara dropped the key, the clink against the hardwood floor ringing out like a gavel. Glitter drifted from her hair as she shook her head, still searching for words. But there were none left to save her. The trap had sprung. The evidence was undeniable, and her betrayal was painted across her body in silver and gold. Robert didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He simply watched her crumble, his expression calm, steady, the expression of a man who had prepared for this moment. Clara had come for his life, his legacy, his security. Instead, she had walked willingly into her own ruin. And as the glitter settled on the carpet, catching the light of the lamp in tiny sparks, Robert knew this was only the beginning. The explosion had exposed her, but the reckoning, the full, merciless reckoning, was still to come. Robert straightened in bed with the sluggish movement of a man startled awake, blinking against the lamplight as though he couldn't quite understand what he was seeing. Daniel burst into the room, his robe trailing behind him, the lines of sleep still carved into his face. His eyes landed on his wife first, and the scene hit him like a blow. Clara stood in the center of the room, drenched in silver and gold glitter that clung to every inch of her body. The key trembled in her hand, the drawer gaped open behind her, and her mouth moved without sound before words finally spilled out. "Daniel, please, it's not what it looks like." Her voice cracked, coded in desperation. She dropped the key, the metallic clink echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. Her hands fluttered uselessly, scattering glitter into the air, the sparkling evidence of her crime clinging tighter with every motion. Daniel froze in the doorway, his gaze darting from Clara to his father and back again. "What the hell's going on?" His voice was raw, straddling the line between disbelief and anger. Robert's expression was a mask of confusion, giving way to devastation. He rubbed his temples as if trying to clear his head, his voice hoarse. I woke up to find her in my room, digging through my drawers. She had the key in her hand. No, Clara snapped, shaking her head so hard glitter fell from her hair like sparks. I thought someone had broken in. I was just making sure everything was okay. He doesn't understand. He's confused. Her words faltered as Robert reached for his phone on the nightstand. He tapped the screen with deliberate precision, and the recording filled the room, her voice spilling out into the air like poison made tangible. The old man's definitely loaded. I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the whole thing. Tomorrow night's perfect. Daniel's out at his work event. I already have the safe key. Once it's done, we're out. No second chances. The sound of her voice, cold and calculated, wrapped around the room like a noose. Daniel's face blanched as the truth carved itself into him. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He looked at Clara, searching for something, anything, that could explain away the venom now replaying on a loop in his ears. Clara lunged toward him, her hands outstretched, glitter flying like sparks from a fire. It was just talk, Daniel. I was scared. I didn't mean it. You know me. You know I would never. Never what? Robert's voice cut through, calm but sharp as a blade. Never steal from me? Never lie to my son? Those are your words, Clara, not mine. I didn't put them in your mouth. You did that all on your own. Daniel's breathing quickened, his eyes locked on his wife, his face twisting with a pain Robert hadn't seen in him since childhood. Tell me this isn't real, he whispered, the plea trembling in his throat. Tell me you didn't plan this. Clara's lips moved, but nothing coherent came out. Her eyes darted, wide and frantic, searching for an escape. She looked like a cornered animal, stripped of her charm. The mask shattered beyond repair. Every excuse she tried to summon withered in her throat, drowned by the echo of her own voice on the recording. The silence that followed stretched thin, broken only by the soft hum of the recording ending, the final click of the audio cutting out. Daniel's shoulders sagged, as if the weight of betrayal had dropped onto him all at once, crushing the last of his denial. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his face in his hands, the glitter in the air mocking the gravity of the moment. Robert watched his son, his heart heavy but steady. This was the moment he had dreaded, the reason he had stayed silent for so long. He had wanted to protect Daniel from the truth, to shield him from the kind of devastation that could hollow a man out from the inside. But Clara had made that impossible. The truth wasn't a weapon Robert wanted to use. It was a weapon Clara had handed him. Clara's voice broke the silence, shrill and cracking. Daniel, please, I was desperate. You don't know what it's like. The pressure I've been under. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just needed a way out. A way out? Daniel lifted his head, his eyes blazing now. By robbing my father? By treating him like some mark you could scam? His voice rose, louder than Robert had ever heard it, filled with anger and heartbreak all at once. Clara flinched under his fury, her glitter-streaked face collapsing into tears. I love you, she sobbed, her voice hollow, her arms reaching for him. Everything I did was for us. For us? Daniel's words were venom. Lies, Clara. All of it. You stood in front of me, night after night, pretending to care about my father, while plotting to strip him of everything he worked for. That's not love. That's greed. Robert sat quietly, letting the storm between them rage. His presence was steady, a silent reminder of the truth that couldn't be twisted anymore. Clara had been caught, her own words the chains that bound her, her glitter-covered skin the brand of her guilt. Daniel rose slowly, his face pale but resolute. He stared at his wife as though he was seeing her for the first time, the illusion stripped away, leaving only the predator beneath. "Get out," he said flatly. Clara froze, her mouth trembling. "What? You can't—" "Daniel, we can fix this. I can explain." "Get out," he repeated, his voice low but final. She hesitated, then turned to Robert, her eyes wild, pleading. But Robert said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence was louder than words, the silence of a man who had seen her scheme from the beginning, who had waited for her to hang herself with her own rope. Clara stumbled toward the door, the glitter still raining down with every frantic step. Daniel didn't move to stop her, didn't offer comfort. He stood like a man gutted but resolute, watching as the woman he had trusted crumbled into nothing but a trail of glitter and lies. When the door slammed shut behind her, the house fell quiet again. Daniel stood in the doorway, shoulders heaving, while Robert remained on the bed, his hands folded in his lap. Their eyes met, father and son, both shattered by betrayal, both bound by the truth. Neither spoke, because words would only cheapen what had been revealed. The glitter still hung in the air, catching the lamplight in fleeting flashes, as if mocking the moment. And Robert knew this wasn't the end. The confrontation had broken Clara's mask, but the reckoning, the full cost of her betrayal, was only beginning to unfold. Clara's footsteps echoed down the hallway, sharp and frantic, each one scattering glitter that trailed behind her like the residue of a lie unraveling. The slam of the front door rattled the frame. Then the house fell silent, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but settles heavy, like dust after an explosion. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway of his father's room, his chest rising and falling as if he had run miles, though he hadn't moved an inch. His hands were still clenched, his knuckles white, and his face was pale, streaked with disbelief that no words could soften. Robert sat upright in bed, his eyes calm but tired, watching his son's world fracture before him. The glitter still hung in the air, catching the light of the lamp in ghostly sparks, marking the space as the stage of truth where mass had shattered. Daniel finally moved, stepping further into the room, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know, Dad. I swear to you, I didn't know." His words cracked with shame, heavy with the guilt of blind trust. Robert let out a long breath, not of anger, but of release. "I know you didn't. That's why I recorded her. That's why I waited." His voice carried no triumph, no gloating, just the steady weight of a man who had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the hardest victories come with the deepest wounds. Daniel lowered himself onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. Glitter from Clara's clothes had clung to his sleeve when she reached for him earlier, and now it shimmered faintly against the fabric, a reminder that betrayal leaves stains no washing can fully remove. "I brought her here," he whispered. "I let her into our lives, and I didn't see what she was doing to you, to us." His voice broke, raw with self-reproach. Robert placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, the weight of it grounding. "Love blinds, Daniel. It blinds the best of us. That's not your sin. Her choices were hers alone." His words cut through the shame, offering not absolution, but perspective. Daniel lifted his head, his eyes red but burning now with something sharper than grief, determination. "She's gone," he said, his voice steadier, "and she's not coming back." For the first time in what felt like years, Robert leaned back against his pillows and let the tension bleed from his body. He closed his eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, but in relief. Clara had stolen his peace, violated his home, tried to brand him a fool. Yet in her downfall, he had reclaimed something more precious than the key she had stolen: his dignity. He opened his eyes again and met Daniel's gaze. She thought she had beaten me. But all she did was show her true self. And now you've seen it too." Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of realization sinking in. He turned toward the open drawer, the spilled glitter still shining across the floor, and shook his head. "I can't believe I let her trick me." His voice was thick with regret, but Robert stopped him with a firm tone. "Don't waste yourself on regret. You've learned now, and that's what matters. Betrayal cuts deep, but it teaches sharper lessons than trust ever could." They sat in silence for a long time, father and son, the air heavy with the aftermath of truth. Outside, the night stretched quiet, the world unaware of the storm that had just torn through their home. The glitter on the carpet gleamed like stars scattered across the floor, mocking but also marking the end of Clara's reign. Daniel leaned back, his shoulders finally easing. "I thought she was my future," he said softly. "Turns out she was just a thief in disguise." Robert's eyes softened, though his voice remained sharp. "Better to learn it now than after she had taken everything. Better to face it here, while you still have something left to rebuild." Daniel turned to his father, his voice breaking, but full of conviction. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for not giving up on us." Robert gave a faint smile, one lined with sorrow, but edged with strength. A father doesn't give up. Even when the world tries to take everything, we don't quit on our sons. His words carried the gravity of truth earned through years of sacrifice, and Daniel bowed his head, ashamed but grateful. The house seemed to exhale with them, its old bones settling into a new rhythm. The predator was gone, her mask ripped away, her lies scattered like glitter across the floorboards. What remained was the core of something stronger, the bond between father and son, reforged in fire. Robert swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood slowly, his body aching, but his spirit unbroken. He looked around the room, the drawer still open, the safe untouched, the evidence of betrayal painted in gold and silver dust. And he felt a bittersweet wave crash through him. Betrayal had come from within, and it had cut deeper than any enemy outside could have managed. But betrayal also carried its own justice, because Clara had destroyed herself with her own greed. Daniel rose beside him, uncertain, his face still shadowed with grief. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert let the question hang in the air, the weight of it filling the silence. Then he answered with calm certainty. "Now we clean up. We move on. We don't let her name define us. What she did doesn't take away who we are." Together, they began to gather the scattered papers, to shut the drawer, to sweep away the glitter that clung stubbornly to every surface. The cleanup was slow, meticulous, almost ceremonial. Each sweep of glitter into the dustpan felt like erasing a piece of her from their lives. The air grew lighter with every pass, the room less tainted, the house breathing easier. By the time dawn began to pale the horizon, Robert stood at the window, the first light catching his tired face. Daniel stood beside him, silent, both men staring out at the world beyond their walls. Neither spoke, because words weren't needed. The night had shown them the worst, but the morning promised something else: survival. Robert turned from the window, his eyes sharp but softer than they had been in days. He clapped a hand against Daniel's shoulder, firm and reassuring. "We'll be all right," he said simply. And in that moment, as the house filled with the thin light of day, Robert felt the truth settle deep in his bones. Betrayal had scarred them, yes, but justice had prevailed, and dignity had been reclaimed. The battle had ended not with rage or ruin, but with a father and son still standing together, stronger for the trial they had endured. What Robert didn't yet know was that the glitter would linger for weeks, wedged into the corners of the floorboards, caught in the seams of the dresser. Every speck would glint like a reminder of the night betrayal was exposed, and justice found its voice. And every time it caught the light, it would remind him of one truth. Even in the deepest cuts of betrayal, resilience shines brighter. Life has a way of revealing truth in the most painful places. Robert's story reminds us that betrayal often comes not from strangers, but from those we welcomed closest to our hearts. Yet within that pain lies a lesson older Americans understand deeply. Age is not weakness, and trust does not mean blindness. His calm patience, his willingness to let deception expose itself, shows that dignity is not lost when others try to take it. It is preserved when we stand firm in who we are. For those of us over 60, this story is a reminder that experience is power. We may not move as fast as we once did, but we see further, we recognize patterns, and we know the value of waiting for truth to reveal itself. Betrayal may cut deep, but it cannot erase resilience. And resilience is the gift of a lifetime lived with lessons earned the hard way. Hold to your dignity, trust your instincts, and never let someone else define your worth. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that prove strength doesn't fade with age. It sharpens.